one who affords precedence to the pleasure of Allah Ta'ala and sets aside personal pleasure as granted by Allah Ta'ala, great pleasure, joy and love which such a heart alone experiences and is aware of. No one else is aware of the tidal waves of pleasure and joy that wash away all debris from such a heart. If someone were to ask, why does no one else come to know of this? The simple answer is that the challenge will no longer remain a test. The examination paper will be out before the exam and all will prepare accordingly. The rule: wherever a paper leaks out, another one must be written. Allah Ta'ala does not want the paper whereby He evaluates, whereby He tests the creation, the universe, to leak. He, therefore, fills the hearts of His lovers with such exquisite joy, pleasure, and endearing ecstasy. Had every unworthy soul not prepared to sacrifice the forbidden desires, dictates and pleasures, been made aware of the pure and perfect pleasure placed in the pure hearts of the patient lovers of Allah Ta'ala, what test will remain? If faith does not go beyond the surface of the heart, one loves Allah moderately, and when it goes beyond it and reaches the core of the heart, one loves Allah extremely, with which He leaves all sins. Love at its least degree is to take pleasure in being with the Beloved alone, and blessed in talking to Him privately. Whoever has sleep and engagement in talk with the people more pleasant to him than the private talk with Allah Almighty, then, how should his love for Allah be held valid? The sign of love then is to be perfectly affable with talking privately to the Beloved, to be perfectly blessed with becoming in seclusion with Him, and to be perfectly estranged from such as hinders that seclusion and interrupts the pleasure of private talk with Him. The sign of intimacy is to have the mind engaged in the pleasure of private talk with one's Beloved. Whoever tastes the pleasure of the pure love of Allah Almighty, it engages him from the pursuit of this world, and makes him feel estrangement from all its inhabitants. Allah has many servants who loved Him so much and found reassurance and satisfaction with Him till they no longer grieved for anything that escaped them. They did not engage in their own fortunes, for their dominion was perfect. What was doomed to them reached them, and what escaped them did not aggrieve them, in reliance on His good manipulation of their affairs. It is due upon the lover, once he returns from his heedlessness, to devote himself wholeheartedly to the Beloved, and engage in blame, asking, O Lord, by which sin have you cut off your kindness from me, and deprived me of your presence, and occupied me by myself and struggle of Satan? Of a surety, this brings about purity and kindness in his heart, which expiates for his previous heedlessness, and his slip becomes a means to renew his remembrance of Allah Almighty, and the purity of his heart. Once the lover sees none other than the Beloved, and sees nothing coming but from Him, he neither grieves nor complains, but rather receives all things with good pleasure and contentment, knowing that the Beloved decrees for him only what is good for him, remembering His statement, but it is possible that you dislike a thing which is good for you, and that you love a thing which is bad for you. Al-Baqarah 216. The lover never gets tired of seeking to please his Beloved, and take pleasure in His service with his heart, no matter how troublesome it might be on his body. Whenever his body becomes powerless, the dearest hope to him is to restore his health and power in order to be able to engage in service of his Beloved. As such, the love for Allah Almighty should be. If love prevails over the soul, it overpowers what is inferior to it. If one's Beloved is dearer to him than laziness, of a surety, he leaves laziness and becomes active in his service, and if he is dearer to him than property, he leaves property in love for him, and so on. Men are in two stations, so do thou understand. The first man only becomes familiar with his master's decrees, in order so to perform his command as to attain his reward. This is good, and in it is great advantage, but such a man rises and falls, now is patient now impatient, pleased now angry, now crosses now reverts. This indeed brings him to God's reward and mercy, but only with trouble, hardship and labor. The second man becomes familiar with his master's decrees, and finds pleasure in his afflicting, being satisfied with his good disposition and choice, entirely and without reserve. For he is familiar with his master and the recollection of him, loving him and cherishing him, and being pleased and content with him. Can the decree of the Beloved, O questioner, ever be a burden to the lover? Will he not accept it with joy and delight? Contentment, Rida, is the heart's happiness with the passing of God's decree, Kata. To be perfectly consistent, the person who is content with God should not even ask God to be content with him because he must also be in agreement with God's rejecting him. A pious man prays to God, "I'm content with you. You be content with me." He then hears a voice which calls to him, "You're a liar. If you were content with me, you wouldn't ask me to be content with you." Abu Sulayman A1 Durrani explains, contentment with God consists of your not asking God for paradise and not asking to be protected from hellfire. Another time he says, "If he sent me to hell, I would be content with this." The worldly man who does not recognize or does not take seriously the transitoriness and worthlessness of this world, sets himself goals in the world. For him sensual love, wealth, honor, earthly power and prestige are blessings in life which he attaches his heart to and sets his hopes on. The pious man considers these goals as base and worthless, and replaces them with higher goals for the sake of which he renounces the others. This renunciation of lower forms of good comprises the content of the religious attitude of Zuhd, renunciation. Zuhd, as Ghazali says, consists of desire turning away from one thing for something else which is better, and it is especially the first part of the process which is described by this term. But that which is given up for something better must itself be desirable in some respect. Renunciation of something which is not desirable is by no means Zuhd. Gaza 1I explains this with images taken from the merchant's world. The merchant gives up something good for something which is more valuable to him. In other words, something which one loves is given up for something else one loves even more. This general meaning of the word, however, is limited in religious usage to renunciation of the present world with its goods for the sake of the hereafter. On a higher, genuinely mystical level, it means turning away from everything besides God and devotion to God as the only goal and worthwhile object for the mind to occupy itself with. Abstinence in this world is the foreshortening of hopes, and this proves what the philosophers have said. For when a man restricts his hopes, he takes no pleasure, and so heedlessness is far removed from him. It is a proof of a man being strongly attached to his master, and enjoying real experience of him in nearness to him, that he does not notice the varying conditions that pass in him. Repose in God, and tranquility, are in proportion to the heart's nearness. This is the explanation of the heart reposing in God, that the heart loses all sense of material things, that the incitements of personal purpose are quiet, and that the mind is tranquil with God and unto God. Then it is that all matters pertaining to this world and the next, all deeds of piety and obedience, actually seek out the man, and attach themselves to him, for they have need of him, and join him, or rather, they are joined with him, for he has turned himself from them, being satisfied with him who possesses them all, so that they may be said to join him. Prayer. Since you have no need of our good and bad deeds, you'll overlook them and give me help. Although I am bound by good and bad acts, I don't say anything good or bad about the good and bad, which I've done. But you frequently bestow good fortune without reason, so you'll also bestow it now without reason. Since you've given me existence without reason, pour your generosity over me now without reason.